Will your children grow up Jewish? It all depends on their education. For more information about an Israeli scholarship, scan the QR code here. Hello and welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, the public is angry as an Israeli court orders an at-risk woman into protective custody against her will. Meantime, the Gilboa prison pimping scandal getting worse and worse. Another woman now corroborating horrific experiences from her time as a guard at the jail. And finally, Miriam Hart, one of the stars from My Unorthodox Life, joining us in studio following the success of the show's first season on Netflix. In a somewhat shocking outcome, an Israeli judge under harsh criticism today with a ruling that some say violated a woman's rights. In an admittedly paternalistic decision, the Israeli courts ordering a woman from Lod into protective custody for 3 days against her will. This in light of the threats against her life from her ex-husband. Normally, a woman in her position would be able to refuse to go to a shelter, but the court saying it's also considering the safety of her 4 children. Especially considering just how serious the threats have already become. Gunshots fired at the family home last Friday, and a man suspected of making several threats, having previously set the woman's car on fire, now on house arrest following interrogation. Furthermore, this is less than a week after a tragic shooting in Lod in which a teacher was murdered in front of her 3 children. Still, the court's decision sharply criticized by activists and lawmakers for, quote, violating the woman's rights. The woman's lawyer arguing that it's unacceptable for a victim to be detained and forced against her will to stay in a shelter, while those who allegedly threaten them walk freely. And former Meretz party head Zehava Galon agreeing, calling on Public Security Minister Omer Barlev to personally intervene. Joining me now with more on this case, former head of the Israeli Women's Caucus, Michal Gera Margaliot. Michal, thank you so much for joining us. Now, how and why can the courts do this? How can a woman be sent against her will to a shelter?
It's a very good question. And I think also the judge wasn't sure that he's able to do that when you look at it from a legal perspective. And the thing is that I don't think that the main question is it legal or not? I think that what we have here is, first of all, I do understand the judge. He see that she's threatened, that her life is in danger. Only last Tuesday, Rabab Abu Siam got murdered after the police begged her not to come back to Lod, and she did because she wanted to see her kids. So I really do understand the judge. He says her life is more precious than her freedom. But, and this is a very big but, I would understand that if the government and the state would do everything in their power to protect her. And after that, maybe for a day or two, in order to protect her, they can even send her somewhere and so on. But it's not the case at all. The government is not doing the most basic things that she promised to do since 2017 and even before. She's not funding the program all the way. It's 250 million shekels a year, which are not funded completely. She didn't pass the bill of an electronic device that would have helped in the case of Rabab, and it would have helped here in this case. She didn't pass it, it's stuck, even though we're waiting for this bill for 5 years. And what's happening now, that a shelter is becoming a prison, and we should not agree to have this situation.
Well, and in any case, the woman in question here was sent to shelter for 3 days. What do the courts hope to achieve in this time? You know, the woman doesn't want to be there, as we've stated, and her problems aren't going anywhere in 72 hours.
No, her problems won't go away. She needs protection. That's the main role of the state, to protect us, all citizens living here and just living our life. That's why we give the government so much power, right? And so I don't know what will happen after. Look, it's not like the judge could have told her, okay, you're going to the shelter and you'll stay there until we'll have a systematic solution. It's not the case. It's not the case now for many years. And it's really bad for the other women and children that are in the shelter, that they got there because they wanted to get there. And it's a place that's supposed to be a secure place, a safe place. We have here two scenarios. We have the problem of this specific woman that everybody wants to keep her life, and we should do everything that we can in order to do that, including, by the way, maybe to lower the criminal bar and to arrest the husband, of course.
Right.
And we have a systematical problem that the state is not doing enough to solve. And as long as the state won't treat domestic terror, as she should do, then we won't have a solution.
Now, taking force out of the equation, then, why not go to the shelter on her own, especially for the sake of her children? What are her options otherwise?
There are many reasons not to do that. People in their place, and I don't know, it can be a work, and can be the kids, the rest of the family. There are many circumstances, and it's also not the right thing that if somebody is threatened, then she is the one that needs to leave everything and go and escape. Right. It's not the right way to treat it. So sometimes there's no other option, and that's what's happening. Women take their kids and they go to the shelter because they want to protect them and their children, but it's not the best option. It's not what we want to see. We want to solve this problem. We want to solve the threat.
So shifting focus away from the victim, as you are right to point out, what are authorities doing about the threat?
Not enough. Like I said, there's this recommended program that already passed in 2017, the government passed it already, that says that after 5 years, they were supposed to have 250 million shekels each year to fight this terrible phenomena. And they're not passing all of the money. I think that this year there was 150 million. So we have an enormous gap. That's one thing. Second of all, we have this specific bill that we've been trying to pass for the last 5 or 6 years of electronic device, and it started to move at this Knesset, and it moved the first call in the Knesset, but it didn't become a bill yet. And the third thing, that the reason here in this case that they're not arresting the husband, as I understood from what was published, is because the criminal bar is higher than what they have in evidence. So maybe to consider to lower the criminal bar in these cases. So there's a lot to do.
Michal, thank you so much for joining us again today.
Thank you, and thank you for talking about this very important issue.
In sadly related news now, increasing reports of violence against women extending retroactively, and focus again descending upon the Israel prison services regarding the alleged rape of yet another female prison guard. ILTV's Kayla Eberlin reporting.
לא יכול להיות שחיילת בצה"ל נאנסת במהלך שירותה בידי מחבל. אתמול שוחחתי בעניין ארוכות עם שר הבט"פ, עם נציבת שירות בתי הסוהר, רב גונדר קטי פרי. הוצגו בפניי הצעדים שנעשו בשב"ס כדי לוודא שמקרה כזה לא יחזור לעולם.
In a harrowing report, another woman coming forwards with allegations of being pimped out to Palestinian terrorist Mahmoud Attallah, who is convicted of murdering Israelis and is serving time in Israeli jail. The first case breaking in 2018, but closing due to a lack of evidence until last year, when the probe restarted in light of new testimony. And now, the latest victim to speak out, former IDF soldier and security guard at the Gilboa prison, Hilla, which is a pseudonym.
המקרה הנידון שקרה בתקופת הממשלה הקודמת נמצא תחת צו איסור פרסום, אבל הוא צריך להיחקר והוא ייחקר. אנחנו נוודא שהחיילת מקבלת סיוע, נמצא את הדין עם האשמים, נבטיח שאירועים כאלה לא יישנו.
In any case, Hilla saying she was handed over by her commander to a dangerous terrorist so that he could hurt and sexually abuse her again and again. and other female guards were similarly set up. Hiller explaining that my commanders, my staff, who I thought were supposed to protect me, handed me over to that terrorist. They made sure I stayed alone with him, contrary to clear rules, so that he could cruelly hurt and abuse me. Meantime, on top of the investigation into the prison, Prime Minister Lapid taking a moment to recognize a number of other disturbing incidents and to call on the country as a whole to do better.
האלימות כלפי נשים היא קטל על המדינה והיא לא יכולה להימשך. רק בשבוע האחרון שוב נרצחה אישה בידי בעלה, בת נרצחה בידי אביה, נחשפו פרטים מזעזעים נוספים בפרשת אונס הסוערת בבית הכלא, נחשפו התכתבויות מחפירות של הכדורגלנים מפרשיית הקטינות. כל המקרים האלה שונים מאוד אחד מהשני, אבל יש להם מכנה משותף. זו אלימות נוראה שהופנתה כלפי נשים. זה תפקידנו כחברה, זו חובתנו כממשלה למגר את התופעה.
Moving on, there are over 1 million Israelis living permanently abroad and millions more non-Israeli Jews already in the diaspora. And while international living is pretty common these days, some argue that for the Jewish people, this spells disaster, particularly amidst the low rates of return to Israel among second and third generation Israelis born abroad. With me to discuss is Middle East expert and researcher at the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies, Dr. Mordechai Kedar. Dr. Kedar, thanks so much for being with us. Now, you've written about this fairly recently even. Can you break down in short what you think the threat is?
Yeah, after visiting the United States and meeting with groups of Israelis who live in the United States of America, I saw the situation on the ground. Most of them are totally secular. They have no connection to any Jewish institution, even not Chabad, which is very inclusive. They send their children to public schools, in most of them, and the commitment of their children, and I estimate their number with in 1.5 million, and the commitment of the children to Judaism at large and Israel in particular is diminishing with the years, and not to mention the third generation, which almost totally has no connection neither to Judaism nor to Israel. The parents or the grandparents, those who actually came from Israel, they keep coming to visit their families or for business or for vacations, but their offspring do not follow them in this issue. And those who were born in the United States or migrated to the United States in early age, they definitely are not going to come back. And the rate of mixed marriage within Israelis or within Israelis' children in the United States of America is higher than the rate of mixed marriage within Jewish people.
So Dr. Kedar,
in the United States.
So what do you suggest be done exactly? I mean, we're talking about free choice. We're talking about secular people living their lives as they see.
Well, Israel should offer them, you cannot force anyone, should offer them education, Jewish education, in the broad scope of Jewish, because most of them are secular. They wouldn't like their children to start keeping Shabbat or things like this, but to keep the Jewish awareness of their children, and of course the connection to Israel, which for me is the same thing. To be Jewish for these Israelis and to be connected to Israel is more or less the same side of the same coin. So Israel should send shinshinim, as we say, means kids who are like a gap year of Israelis in there. Israel should encourage Israelis to send their children for a gap year here in Israel, or maybe even more than gap year. And Israel should facilitate the return of Israelis by all kinds of offers regarding businesses and housing or whatever Israel can provide. And Israel has to do whatever it can in order to bring back those children, those people who migrate to the United States of America because it's more convenient there, or Canada, or Australia, or Europe even, because they don't have, or most of them don't have any real problems of what we say klita, of absorption. They will be much more easily absorbed than olim chadashim, those who newcomers who never were in Israel. They know the language, they know the mentality, they might even have real estate here in Israel, or relatives who can help them or accept them and be the hugging environment which will accept them and absorb them. Definitely, Israel must look at these million people.
Dr. Kedar, if I want to press you a little bit on the logistics, though, because I mean, you mentioned, of course, that it would be beneficial for Israel and for the Jewish people, nation as a whole, for this unity, for this for this program. But how do you plan for this to work long term? What's the sustainability about that? Because a new subsidy for a house or a car or some sort of, how is Israel supposed to compete long term with Europe and Australia and the United States?
Look, Mr. Porras, I'm not a planner. I just gave I rang the bell about the problem. I exposed the problem, or maybe brought it to the attention of media like ILTV and others. And the government now has to sit with itself, the Sochnut or the Jewish Agency or whoever is in charge, Misrad HaKlita, the Ministry of Absorption, and all of them should, and of course the Ministry of Finance, should all sit together to discuss the issue and maybe to do some surveys in order to find out what might bring Israelis back home and what might bring their children home, even if their parents remain in the valley or in other places in the United States of America.
All right, Dr. Kedar, thank you so much for joining us again today.
Pleasure.
Now, there's nothing wrong with integration per se, but at the same time, individuality and various cultural traditions should still be preserved, if not celebrated. So what do you do when you're in a tiny community separated from your homeland? They say it takes a village to raise a child. So where's the village? Because when it comes to education, after-school programming, karate classes, and music lessons, the parents seemingly left on their own to figure things out. And with private education especially, the tuition costs for even a grade school student can easily put universities to shame. That's why for most people, the public school system is the only choice available. And while for most this is a perfectly fine situation, this poses a tricky question for certain religious and foreign communities. How do you properly pass on the connections to your heritage? Well, for the Jews of America, and in particular the children of Israeli parents, the Chinuch Yehudi, or Jewish Education Association, hopes to help by providing Jewish families with scholarships and grants towards their children's Jewish learning.
It was a big thing to see our kids come home, and just with all that Jewish education that's on top of what they learned from the home.
According to the organization, fewer than 10% of the 60,000 Jews in South Florida, for example, send their children to a Jewish education. And already over the last few years, several hundred children have switched from public schools to private Jewish day schools thanks to the Chinuch Yehudi organization, on top of the schools themselves getting investment to better their education programs.
Our students will be able to leave elementary, middle, and Zrat Hashem high school with a Jewish foundation where they can go off to whatever they decide to do in life, knowing that they're Jewish and being inspired.
It's been a year now since the release of Netflix series My Unorthodox Life, which follows the real Hart family as they leave the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community. So what's changed for the Harts, though, since their exposure last year? And when will season 2 come out? Joining me with answers is Miriam Hart. Miriam, it is a pleasure to have you here in studio. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
It's great to have you, and welcome to Israel. Of course, this is not your first time to Israel.
No, but this is my longest time, so I'm really happy to be spending a lot of time in this country.
All right. Well, tell me first about what it's been like going. Tell me about your experience, really, going from like this general anonymity in a sense to this stardom, and especially given the context for which you're getting this attention.
Yeah, I mean, like, this decision of doing this TV show with my family has been something that was my decision. Really? I've had a lot of time to think about do I want to be a public figure or do I want to stay private with my life, with my, relationships, with what I do? And after thinking about it for a very long time, I decided that I wanted to give up my privacy in exchange for so many positive things that come with being a public figure that I am now. Yeah.
So, and then how does that relate to maybe your trip to Israel? I understand you just graduated from Stanford.
Yes.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah, how does that translate? How are you leveraging your stardom, your new platform?
Yeah, so definitely being in Israel is a whole nother experience for me. I would say because the show was about a Jewish family, being in Israel, a lot more people do recognize me. And it's really fun. I love meeting people. I love saying hello. And since I just graduated Stanford, I majored from the School of Engineering. And so I've been meeting a lot of founders here. So really my schedule has been super packed. The city of Tel Aviv took me out on a full day trip, meeting different companies, meeting different female founders, just learning about what the tech scene's like here, and it's really incredible.
Are you going to move to Israel, or are you just creating some partnerships?
Creating some partnerships. I want to support the state. I want to support the people here. And so maybe spend more time in Tel Aviv.
Right.
We'll see. Yeah.
So, okay, I don't know, what kind of reactions are you also getting in the wake of everything that's happened in the last year?
In general, the reactions have been really, really positive. On my Instagram, when the show came out, I just started getting so many messages from people saying, thank you for sharing the story. I've been getting messages not from fundamentalist Jewish families, but fundamentalist Mormon families, fundamentalist Christian families all over the world saying, I've had these experiences and thank you for giving us a voice. And so really, it feels so good to see people say, I came out to my family because of you. I want to go to university because of you. Just these really positive impacts that this show has made on so many women and so many queer people, it just really brings me so much joy.
Have you received criticism, and how have you maybe dealt with that?
Of course. In anything that you do, there will be criticism, but I don't take it personally. I think when you speak up about something that is very powerful and affects a lot of people, it hurts some people, it makes some people offended, but that's just part of life. You can never really stand up for something that you believe in without hurting somebody's feelings. And I think that our mission in the show was to empower women and to show that any woman can be financially independent, they can do what they set their mind to, and I think that we're succeeding in that.
So what were maybe some of the biggest changes for you or for you and your family coming from orthodoxy to secularism, and for you especially, coming out as bisexual, et cetera?
Yeah. I would say that although there are so many changes in terms of what I wore, obviously, in terms of what I ate, in terms of when I went out, going out on a Saturday, how I spent my time, those are all big changes.
Did you feel guilt at first doing those things, or?
So I do remember the first time I wore pants, and it felt, I was at an H&M, I put on a pair of jeans, they're skinny jeans, I was, I think, 16 years old, and it felt weird. It felt weird seeing my legs in skinny jeans, that was something that was for the non-Jewish people. That was something that wasn't for the chosen people. These are things that I was grown up being told. But I knew logically that it was okay to be doing what I was doing. And even though I felt the guilt, I knew that it didn't make sense, and it was emotional guilt. And so logically, I knew it was okay, and eventually the emotional guilt did go away. And so that's why I was able to logic myself into doing those things.
All right, Miriam, it has been an absolute pleasure to sit here and speak with you. Thank you again so much for coming in, and I'm happy that you came to Israel again. And yeah, I can't wait for season 2 to come out. I know that it is coming.
It is coming. It is coming.
All right, so stay tuned, everybody. It is coming. Miriam, thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Clear skies are expected around the country this evening, with lows averaging about 20 degrees Celsius or 68 Fahrenheit. And then tomorrow we can expect clear and sunny skies, along with top temperatures climbing to a sweltering 36 degrees Celsius or 97 Fahrenheit. That's all for today's news. For more updates from Israel and around the world, check out our website, ILTV.tv. You can also subscribe to our newsletter and join us on our streaming platform at ILTV+, and you can catch that across all of your devices. I'm Aaron Porras. Be well, and thank you so much for watching. Will Will your children grow up Jewish? It all depends on their education. For more information about an Israeli scholarship, scan the QR code here.